Okay, quick question. How many distortion effects are in Reason? 3, right? You've got Scream 4, Pulverizer, and the little half-rack fold-back distortion unit. Well, what if I told you that today I was going to show you Reason's 14 other distortion effects? That's right, there are 14 other distortions hiding inside Reason that we're all either overlooking or didn't even know existed. So today, let's run them down from the least weird to the most weird in terms of how much they might blow your mind. And if I'm overlooking any, leave a comment below and blow my mind. We'll be applying all these distortion effects to the same synth bassline today so that we can really compare them side by side. First up are 2 distortion units that some of you might have already thought of, but many often overlook. The Softube amplifiers in Reason have built-in distortion models, and don't let their guitar and bass amp facade put you off if you're not a guitarist. When you first load one of these effects into the rack, it will have its cabinet speaker simulator active by default. So we set that to bypass, and our signal is now being distorted by the various overdrive settings. And we can go about using the gain knob and the EQ settings for Softube's distortion algorithms. The Softube bass amp has different overdrive sounds and different controls for shaping your signal, so they're both worth trying out. I particularly like the bass amp's ultra-low setting for 808s and other sub-basses, and to try out different selectable mid-frequencies. Hidden distortion effect number 3 isn't really so hidden, so much as just another one that people often overlook. Synchronous is a multi-effect device with sound coloration, delay, and reverb effects which you can dial in over time using the waveform display up top for some pretty crazy modulation effects. But if we right-click and reset Synchronous, we can tap into its very simple but very effective distortion section. Turning it on defaults to a nice lo-fi bit crush distortion. For each type of distortion, we've got an amount dial and a character dial to try out. Distortion 1 and 2 are different variations on overdrive. And we've even got a ring modulator to play with. Hidden distortion effect number 4 isn't even found in Reason's effects section. For this one, we need to go to the instruments. And follow along here, because what we do next will be repeated anytime we use one of Reason's instruments for its built-in effects section. We drag a Kong drum machine into our rack while holding down the Shift key to disable any automatic cable routing. Then, we flip around the rack to the back, and we can cable up our hidden distortion. Let's move the output cables from our instrument to the output on Kong. Then we can expand Kong's lower section and drag audio cables from our synth to Kong's audio inputs. Flipping back around to the front, we've got 2 effect slots in the master section that we can load up with Kong's overdrive module. This distortion effect has a nice interesting resonator component to it that can add a nice hollow quality to whatever runs through it. And Kong's 2 effect slots are connected, so if we want, we can run one distortion into another distortion for some really over-the-top overdrive. Kong is definitely not the only instrument in Reason with a hidden distortion effect inside for us to use. In fact, there's several Reason instruments that have both an audio input and built-in effects for us to explore. And now that you know how to cable that up, let me show you a few more. Hidden distortion number 5 is the Scenic hybrid synthesizer, which has 2 stereo audio inputs for its A and B engines. We plug our synth into one of those, reset Scenic to clear it out, click the edit button on Scenic's front panel, and we go to the Insert Effects section. There's our saturation section ready to go, which has its own way of handling saturation via threshold triggers, density controls, and a bypass amount for leaving high frequencies unsaturated. Similar to Scenic, Processed Pianos has its own built-in effects, with its own distortion, which makes it Secret Hidden Distortion number 6. We cable it up on the backside, right-click and reset it, but this time we have a little more housekeeping to do because Process Pianos has its own reverb, echo, and EQ on by default. If we just want the distortion, we'll deactivate these and go to the Effects Inserts tab to turn on the bit crush and distortion effects. Okay, let's look at another one of these distortion effects hiding inside instruments for number 7. Umpf Retro Beats has a cool tape distortion emulator in its effects section. So you know the routine by now. We'll cable up our synth to the tape input on the back of Umpf, head over to the tape tab on the front, and we'll dial up the tape volume so that we can make use of the lo-fi hum and hiss, as well as driving the tape harder and getting some of that nice tape compression in there too. On a bass sound like this can be more subtle, but if we temporarily switch over to a drum break for a second, you can see how this gives some really nice grime to the sound, especially if we roll off the high-end tone for a rather authentic cassette tape downgrade to our sound. Okay, here's a fun one that gets back to using Reason's actual effect devices. Let's drag a rotor effect into the rack. And the first thing we do is actually disable the whole purpose of Rotor, the rotating speaker effect. If we stop the rotary speaker from rotating, what we're left with is Secret Distortion number 8. Our sound running through 2 speaker emulators, a drum speaker for the low end and a horn speaker for the high end. We can experiment with cool controls to overdrive it, and with the relationship between the crossover frequency between the 2 speakers. Max out the crossover and dial all the way to the drum speaker, and we've got a blown out boombox. Go the other way, and we're adding thinned out sizzle and top end character. Secret Distortion number 9 can be found hiding as a single knob in one of Reason's other effects. The echo delay unit has a drive section meant to color the delayed sounds that run through it. But if we misuse the echo by turning the delay time down to its minimum, turning off tempo sync, turning the feedback all the way down, and maxing out the dry-wet knob, we can use just the drive control to distort sounds. We can try out the overdrive, distortion, or tube saturation emulation. And activate the onboard filter to accentuate a more 303 acid house quality to this effect. Overdriving one of Reason's effects can also work great. If we replace this echo with the sweeper modulation effect, reset it, and then move over to the filter section, we can crank the drive control and dial in a cutoff frequency that crunches our sound in the right way. The advantage here being that you've also got different filter types to try out, which will impact the overall sound of the distortion too. If you're using an earlier version of Reason and you want to do this too, you can do it with Thor, which brings us to Hidden Distortion number 11. Let's drag a Thor synthesizer into the rack. Right-click and reset it, and then we'll cable up our synth to audio in 1 and 2 on Thor, just like we did for Scenic or Kong. Let's choose the low-pass ladder filter in the Filter 3 slot and head down to the programming matrix, where we can set up a source from audio input 1 that goes to Filter 3's left input, and at the max amount. Then we do the same thing again, for audio input 2, going to Filter 3's right input, at the max amount. And we've got ourselves another filter that we can overdrive just like Sweeper. Alright, we're getting a little weirder now. We've already seen that distortion effects can be hiding inside other Reason devices. So for hidden distortion effect number 12, let's check out Reason's Alligator triple filtered gate. The Alligator is a 3-band filter, low, mid, and high, that chops your signals up using its gated patterns. And each band has its own controls to dial up the onboard phaser, delay, stereo pan, and yes, a drive control. There is just one problem though. Accessing this drive control comes with the inescapable reality of the gate patterns that never stop. But since almost nothing in the Reason rack is ever really impossible, we can open up these gates with a little control voltage help. Let's flip to the back of the rack and drag in 2 devices with the shift key held down again to disable auto cabling. First is the matrix pattern sequencer, and then a spider CV splitter. We'll run a cable from the matrix's curve CV output to the input of split A, and from there we'll distribute that signal to gate 1, gate 2, and gate 3 on the back of Alligator. Back on the front, we'll switch the matrix pattern sequencer to curve mode and draw in one giant maxed out curve. Now you'll see that when we're stopped and not playing back, the Alligator is doing its internal patterns. But once I hit play, the matrix takes over and keeps those gates open the whole time. And this allows us to play with the drive controls for our 3 bands. What I like about this type of distortion is that we can dial in the drive amount differently on the low band, mid band, and high band. And since the slope of the high, low, and mid band frequencies are not perfect right angle frequency shelves, we get a little weird overlap in the blending of our bands. And in this case, that's cool. For the last 2 hidden distortions, number 13 and 14, we go to the weirdest of them all, both in how we access it and also in how it can make our sound distort. Reason's Complex 1 is a fully modular style synthesizer with a front panel that lets you drag audio and CV signals around in any imaginable configuration. One of its many modules is a waveform shaper, which some of you might already know, waveform shaping is a form of distortion. So let's reset Complex 1, click Show Cables, and disconnect every routing that's here by default. Then we'll drag a cable from the external audio in jack to the audio in of our shaper module. We'll drag the output of the shaper to Complex 1's mixer. Of course, by this point I've already cabled it up on the backside, just like I did for any of the other Reason instruments we've seen today with audio inputs. Now we can run our bass through pretty extreme styles of waveform folding distortion, and even more messed up madness like bipulse. But this is not the only distortion that we have in Complex 1. That's right, for secret hidden distortion number 14, we're going to a rather unassuming looking module in Complex 1, the function module. The function module takes 2 different signals and then applies your choice of math. Yeah, you heard that right. Math, to get a new resulting signal. So to feed the function module, we need 2 signals. One is obvious, that's our external audio input 1, so we'll cable that up to the X value. And for the Y value, we could use so many different things, but for demo purposes, I'll use the LFO output into function Y, and we'll cable the output of our function module to the mixer. Press play, and you'll hear our bass is being distorted by the function module. We change the quality of this distortion by changing the input values of either X or Y. So in this example, let's change the rate of our LFO. And we can change the math function being performed too. some of these get pretty out there. So that's it. 14 hidden distortion effects inside Reason that you might have not known you had access to. And you know what? Probably not all of them. In fact, if I missed one and you have a secret distortion trick in Reason that you like to do, let me know in the comments section. But that's it for now. I'll be back soon, and in fact, actually, some of you might have already figured out from looking at something new in the studio here what I'll be doing next time. Until then, make some great music, and I'll see you soon.